This is an exercise of discretionary presidential power. I'll leave aside the constitutionality or the
Right.
issues of politics, but just from an economic point of view, in the past, when there have been large moves of tariffs, it's mostly been in the US because Congress has authorized them. This is being done day to day, or as Justin Wolfers joked, intraday tariff changes on presidential whim. And that
Right.
creates even more uncertainty.
Take the
So
mic.
Doug would say
Okay.
we're in new territory and it
Yeah.
ain't pretty.
Professor Irwin joining us from Dartmouth. We'll do that on Friday here on Bloomberg
Ooh, solid.
Surveillance. Dr. Posen, as simple as I can, Krugman, with his Nobel speech, would look at the microeconomics of the moment, and there'd be a lot of fancy Adam Posen talk. Forget about it. What's the deadweight loss for our audience right now, our audience in Winnipeg, our audience in Wisconsin? What's the deadweight loss given all of this?
On the order of $1,000+ a year for the average household, higher for lower income households. And that doesn't include the hits to retirement funds or the going forward, the lower opportunities because investments getting chilled. Direct hit is on the order of $1,000 per household. You could argue if the tariffs stick, or if they put on the across the board tariffs, it gets closer to $1,500 to $2,000 a household.
Adam, I'm hearing the recession word more and more over the last several weeks. Is that in your calculus anywhere?
So I've been saying for a while now that I was expecting a large boom and then Fed induced bust under Trump, but I always held out that this was a radical enough program that it was bimodal, meaning, again, simple talk. It wasn't going to end up in the middle. It was going to be one of two outcomes. I had the recession probability only at like 15+%, so no different than anybody in a normal time. But what I kept saying, and this may have been a hedge, but it turns out to be reality, was if Trump administration overdid it on tariffs, on migration, on fiscal follies, that would swap us into the tariff round, excuse me, into the recession camp. So I've upped my recession subjective probability to 30%. I still think it's more likely than not we get a boom bust, but you throw in the geopolitical shock, which is enormous and which really changes the game for Europe and for everybody. And then you throw in the fact that Doge shutting down Department of Education, USAID, I may not like, but I expected that. Throwing a miasma of similar uncertainty over all government contracting, all government workforce has huge effects. So, yeah, the recession risk has gone way up.
From some of President Trump's policy people, we're starting to hear more and more discussion that what the president is aiming to do is to kind of reshape the U.S. economy to bring more manufacturing back to the U.S. And some folks are concerned that that's kind of counterintuitive to what we've experienced over the last 50, 60, 70 years of more of a globalization and at least in the U.S. economy, a focus on the services part of the economy. How do you view this potential policy shift for the U.S.?
I view it as a very mistaken policy shift for two reasons. First, in line with what you said, increasing manufacturing employment or literal production within US borders isn't necessarily a good thing. If they want to force Americans to do rare earths mining or production of generic pharmaceuticals, those are steps backward for US workers. And so you would either have to vastly overpay, which then makes it totally uncompetitive internationally and totally an inflation for the domestic households. Or you're just subjecting American workers to bad jobs that we're too well endowed and skilled to do. The second reason, though, is it's just not going to work. My colleague Robert Lawrence, who's at Harvard and Peterson Institute, had a book out last fall called Behind the Curve, which I think established brilliantly that even if you fantasize about going back to 1958 and a bunch of guys getting to be big breadwinners for their families with no education, which there's reasons you might like that, it's just not going to happen because the total taste of the world and the movement of technology for globalization has made it impossible to create large numbers of manufacturing jobs of that sort. So it's a bad goal and it's not going to work.